Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. Now, if you've been watching along for this is our third season, you know that I have a vast and interesting network of super cool people who are doing super cool things. And one of them is my dear friend, Pamela Slim, who is joining us today. And Pam is an award-winning author, a speaker, a business coach who works with small businesses ready to scale their business and their IP. So she takes people who have great ideas and she helps them take those great ideas to more people. She's the author of Escape from Cubicle Nation, which came out in 2009, Body of Work, which came out in 2014, and her newest book right here, The Widest Net, came out just at the end of last year. Now, Pam and her husband co-founded the K Main Street Learning Lab in Mesa, Arizona. And this learning lab is super cool. It's on the main street of the town where she lives. It brings in all the local small businesses and it helps them to really grow their business by creating diverse programming and strategies. And frankly, she works with people like me. I flew out to Mesa and spent the entire day at her learning lab, where she has, I think, what is it, Pam? A 40-foot whiteboard?
It's big. I should measure it, but a gigantic wall that is all whiteboard paint. Yes.
Okay. So I am a nerd of basically the highest caliber. I pride myself. Like, I went to computer sleepaway camp when I was 13 years old. Like, I like a capital N nerd. And I walked into the learning lab and I was like, oh boy. And the board was all white. And by the end of the day, it was filled with all the ways to take my ideas and actually put them into practice. How did you learn that you were someone who could help people do that? Like, take blank space and make creative, strategic, actionable business ideas out of them?
That's a really good question because the board itself, that wall, I'll tell you, when I was looking for spaces down here, and it's a longer story, and that I didn't necessarily lay off on a plan to open a learning lab. It was more when I saw the space, all of a sudden my mind exploded with possibilities. But when I saw that wall, it immediately something jumped to mind about wanting to fill it out with ideas and sketch it out. And if I think about some of the ways that I'm wired, the earlier threads in my career, I was in college. My major was actually international service and development, with a focus on non-formal education as a tool for social and economic change in Latin America. So say that
Okay, wait.
three
So,
times fast.
wait, what? Okay, so international development, and then what was that? What, like, does that even fit on a diploma? Like,
It doesn't. I know what one would think. I went to a tiny little college called World College West. We called Which College Where. It had 100 students, and all of it was global studies. It was very grassroots oriented.
so you're a
Really,
hippie.
I was totally a hippie. I'm from Northern California. I'm from Marin County, California, so
Perfect.
totally a hippie. And so really, it is just looking at how non-formal education, which to me sometimes is like the front door is open and somebody walks in and we sit down on the couch and I'm like, tell me about what's going on with you and your business, and you have a conversation. Those kinds of non-formal education, community engagement, all the cool words that we use right now for how it is that we're building community, is really what I learned in the context of really international development. And from in my own journey, I was drawn to the big picture strategy. So I think I've always been wired to be curious about how pieces and parts fit together. And when I decided that it didn't really make sense to be like a 19-year-old white woman expatriate aid worker, because clearly the people themselves had much better ideas than I did in my experience, that led me into the world of training and development. And honestly, so many of the tools that I learned when I was working in that field for about 15 years were really the things I think that I have translated into my work as a business coach, because that's where I learned about instructional design and planning and, phases of team development. And I think that's where a lot of the, squiggles on the board are informed by that experience, really looking through the lens of performance improvement, analysis, and instructional design.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions based on all of these things, but it's fascinating to me because I am the same person. I look at somebody and I say, sit down, tell me what you're trying to do. Like, this is kind of who I am. It is in my bones. And I love to figure out what people actually really care about, right? It's not the like look good goals, the ones that you put up on the wall and they look good on the walls. It's like, what actually is exciting and interesting to you? Because I believe that's the person who shows up at 2 a.m. when all hell breaks loose, right? When the shit
Yes.
hits the fan, what you really care about is the thing that you actually work on, because you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goals. So I want to talk about that and how you help people do it. But before that, I want to go deeper on one thing you
Mm.
said, which that you can't be a 19-year-old white woman going to these other countries and
Yeah.
helping them. Because as you know, that's what I did my TEDx talk on, right? Like, stop asking, how can I help? And making the problem all about me, 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 me. Here's a
Yeah.
solution I have. So let me define your problem. There are people who I consider to be quite intelligent humans, right? Somebody like the founder of Tom Shoes, who decided that he was in a third world country, and he looked around and he's like, these people are poor. They're not going to school. I realize that it's because they have to have shoes to go to school. So I'm going to give away shoes. Right. So he does this buy one, get one, gives away shoes. And then years later, he's realizing that he's not actually solving the problem, because the kids grow out of the shoes. They can't get more shoes. Then they have to go home again. He's also putting people out of work who were making shoes. And he realizes that the solution is actually building factories and helping people there to, learn how to make shoes and distribute shoes. It took him a long time to do this. How did you figure this out at 19? I think like we grow up, especially as Americans, such a narcissistic universe where we
Mm.
think we are the beacon of light that's going to save the whole world. How did you do at 19? How did you figure that out?
I I think part of it is in the way that I like to connect with people, and like you, my best friend calls me a prober because she's like, "Could you please just not have somebody crying within 5 minutes of meeting you, like
Oh no, that's just
sharing
called
their
being a Jewish mom.
that's right,
I
like
come by
sharing
that
their
honestly.
sharing their deepest fears." But
Yes, I make
um,
people cry for a living, I'd say sometimes.
exactly, I never, I'm not trying to evoke sadness, but it's like I love connection, and
Yes.
when I am deeply interested and probably empathetic to noticing the kind of feelings that are going on around me.
Yeah.
Sometimes, of course, it can be hard to be very aware of dynamics and seeing what's happening. But
Yes.
I think, in one hand, just having that lens in terms of how I'm wired and looking around and literally saying, like, I have no idea how this teacher training program that I'm working on in Bogota, Colombia, where I have all these people here. There's so many dynamics. There's decades of civil war. There are all these embedded issues. Like, what do I even know about this in order to apply it? And when I'm looking around at the people who I'm building relationships with, they're wise and deep and connected and speak the language a lot better than I do, right, at that point, and all these things. And so, on one hand, I think it was just having that sense of not like barging into a room. That's part of what my dad modeled. My dad has always been a very big community builder. He was a very strong introvert. I am an extrovert, but he just would be that very quiet person that really observed what was happening and would listen and notice
Mm.
what was going on. So that's one piece, I think, for my nature. The other was really the study, because I did learn a model that was really based more on grassroots economic development, that was really centered, not on being that World Bank parachuting in, with an idea. And the other thing that's really been an amazing blessing from the time I was 18 is my best friend Desiree Attaway, who now is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, who is a Black woman, has shared consistently her life experience, her point of view, her perspective, where through the decades that we've been best friends, has really evolved also into having an analysis and an understanding about the problematic nature of decades and decades of white people parachuting into places, including me here on Main Street, just saying, hey, I'm here. Here are all the programs. And that's why we took the absolute opposite approach to community building when we came here.
So let's talk about that, because I mean, I think that's a lot of what you help your readers learn about in your book, The
Mm,
Widest Net, is how do you figure out who your audience is, who your audiences should be, how do you connect to them, how do you cast the widest net for them? So can we talk a little bit about the building of the Learning Lab?
yeah. The One of the core reasons why my husband Darryl, who is my co-founder, the reason why we started it, my husband is Navajo, Dene, and I had done a 23 city tour before. I call it the Unbooked Tour, with a little wink to Scott Stratton from
Love Scott
Unmarketing,
Stratton. Yes.
um, where I really was wanting to test the model that I had developed about community building in places where I had done book tours before. So I literally went on Facebook and said, hey, I want to go on tour doing this thing. Where should I go? And I just copied all the places. If we had enough people to make it happen, I ended up going to those cities. And for some reason, the first day of the tour at Berkeley at Mothership Hacker Moms, a cool co-working space, of course, very Berkeley.
Yes.
Um, I asked, how many of you have ever seen a Native American business presenter presenting as an expert on a business topic at a business conference? And then I asked everybody in every city, and I'm talking big ones, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, places with a lot of people, who had ever seen them. And so after 23 cities of about a 3-month tour, only 7 people ever had, and 4 of those were in Vancouver, Canada.
Mm.
So I came back and was talking with my husband about that. And I was like, wait a minute. He was a business owner for many years. He ran a heavy equipment construction business successfully here in the Phoenix area. And I would go to conferences where there were thousands of Native business owners everywhere speaking on all kinds of business topics. And so it was like, the issue is not that there aren't experts on these topics, and that there's absolutely no visibility and there's no opportunity. And so it's always the first nugget of how it is that you begin to formulate a plan for connection. Is how the fundamental questions for me is always, who is here, who is not here, and why aren't they here? So when we showed up here in the learning lab, because we were saying, like, we need to do something about this in our own community so that our kids and nieces and nephews and extended relatives are going to see themselves represented in the kinds of fields and professions and events and, opportunities. And so what can we do? And that foundational question of, who's here on Main Street, who's not here, why aren't they here, became the source of a bunch of initial conversations. And so for us, the first phase of what we did, which is really what I suggest for anybody building a community around anything, is just listen first. Have an open door, have conversations, begin to do more of that investigative journalism. It's like you find a thread. So there might be one person who comes in and I might say, tell me what you're trying to do. And where else have you gone? Like, have you tried any other places, to get some support for your small business? And then just pay attention with curiosity to what they would say. So they say, yeah, I went one place, but I was totally ignored, or yes, I went and I worked with this particular business coach and they were amazing. And so as I was learning this, it's like beginning to get all these little threads. And for me, the first part of visualization that you do for the community and ecosystem building is beginning to visualize who are actually all the organizations, people, resources, companies, nonprofits that are organized around solving the same problem that you're looking to solve for your ideal clients. So for us here, it was like, what are the other people who are trying to help create more opportunity for diverse entrepreneurs in Mesa?
Okay, so that's step one. How inside of step one do you not fall prey to confirmation bias, which is, I think, what a lot of entrepreneurs do is they sort of listen for what they want to listen for and they kind of ignore what they don't.
I think it's a combination of, on one hand, and I'll just say for the specific path that we did for the Learning Lab, first of all, we this is something we fund ourselves. So we're not beholden to anybody else who is giving us funding for needing to have a solution in the short term. And everything was really driven by just openness and curiosity. So we had time and we took a lot of time. That to me is probably the biggest thing that was a differentiator of not immediately saying, okay, I talked to 10 people in the first week or 2 or month, and therefore let me begin to develop a prototype and a working premise, because there are so many layered components when you come to intersectional community building. If somebody had never met me before, I'm showing up in my identity as a white woman. There are all kinds of embedded reasons why there may be mistrust, how long it takes for somebody to connect and understand me. There are certain kinds of conversations that people are not going to feel comfortable having with me. They might feel more comfortable having with my husband or with some of my Navajo relatives or other community members. So part of it, I think, is, and I had I had this happen all the time, which we know in our branding, marketing, trying to make things happen way. I had so many people, especially my own white folks, who would be coming in well, what is this place? What's your business model? What are you doing? And
How are you
inside,
going to make money?
how are you going to make money? Having that initial kind of fight in defensiveness inside. And after a while, I just began to be really comfortable saying, we don't know yet. We don't know. We're kind of waiting to see what it is that the community wants, and when we know, we'll let you know. So they'd be like, is it a incubator? Well, not really. Do you do training classes? Well, I don't know. Sometimes, and so it's that process of really listening deeply, which of course is a bit of a luxury for people who are wanting to actually get a business up and running. But part of what I is a main message, and something about the method that I think is important. You and I know it can seem like sometimes people just pop out of nowhere. I'm like, especially at 55, I'm like, who is this whippersnapper who just like showed
Yeah.
up on the scene all of a sudden, just
Yeah.
seeming to have everything together? Or somebody maybe that's a peer or a colleague where all of a sudden like the submarine emerges and you're like, wow, they're everywhere. There is this entire incubation period that for some people is a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, that we don't see and we don't name when you look at often what it takes for somebody to have opportunity, to feel like it's right timing, to test and try something, or to really be working on relationships. And I know for me, many of the relationships I have been built over decades. And so having the putting in our model and idea, when we're thinking about building a business, you're not just going to say, I have been totally isolated and alone. I want to build a community, and I'm going to do a few activities, have a little Zoom mixer if I'm in person, invite a few people over, and then all of a sudden expect that I'm going to have an instant tang community.
Yeah, but okay, we have a LinkedIn user who's asking a question. Delay to action is so tough. Any techniques to help press pause, or does it just come with time? I mean, that's the thing, right? Like if you think you have this good idea and you're excited about it and you want to get it out there, I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of, well, first they listen to the first 10 people and the first 10 people say it's a great idea until they go and they don't press deeper and deeper and deeper. But the ability to be able to say, especially if you were somebody who was not part of the community that you were trying to serve, right? You look
Yeah.
different, you come from a different background, maybe you're middle-aged, maybe you're white, maybe you're a woman, all the things that people are like, yeah, I don't know, right?
Mhm.
Where does the confidence to just know that I can just stay with us a little longer? Like
Mm.
I think most successful entrepreneurs are the ones that are able to just hang on just a little longer, to stay uncomfortable just a little longer. It's like lots of entrepreneurs get to 90% of the road and then they pull the parachute because it's just too much. And like hanging on by your fingernails for that last 10% is where you learn the really good stuff. Where
Mm.
does the where did you get the confidence, and where can other people get the confidence to just stay in that discomfort a little more?
I think for a project, part of it is to build in your safety net. And
Mm,
I've been in business 25 years. And so I have lots of work. I have clients. We knew that we have paid work, a stability of clients that I'm working with virtually that I have been doing for decades, that allowed us the time that it actually takes. And in this case, I'm talking about building local community, which is just slowly getting to know people. People want to like watch you and see, are you really the person you appear to be? All these kinds of
mhm.
things that we know over time. So the same thing, I used to say this for years when I had my blog Escape from Cubicle Nation, or when I was coaching a lot of people to leave corporate to start a business. You want to be working on your side hustle usually for a long time, like doing that listening,
Yes.
testing and trying, going out in the market to make sure there's water in the pool before you jump. And so that kind of experience is one I find that we don't often hear about it, because sometimes when we're talking about the highlights of our business life and career, it's like, yeah, I launched this business in March of 2020, and then by 2021 I was making $1 million, which is great. Like, I
Right.
love that. I get
But
so excited
nobody
if
talks
anybody.
about the messy middle, right? They talk
Nobody
about like,
talks
I
about
found
it.
it in my garage and then I had an IPO for $1 billion, but nobody talks about the like, and then I had a fight with my spouse, or then I missed my kid's school play, or then I had a, bleeding ulcer. Like nobody talks about the stuff in the middle where it gets really ugly and scary.
That's right. Or I tried 2 other startups and it didn't
Right.
work, or it took
Right.
me years to be able to get so and so to answer my email,
Right.
and so those are the critical parts that I just try to make visible about it. And of course, depending upon what it is that you're doing and contextually what you're doing in your business. A lot of work I do day in and day out is just helping people to slowly expand their connections with different people in the ecosystem. And so in many ways it's more of a dynamic thing where you might reach out. Here we see some people jumping in from LinkedIn. Bom dia, José. I lived in Brazil as well, so I'll bust out a little Portuguese for you. But we might meet somebody here, somebody jumps in to the comments on a conversation like this. After it, I might click through, say, oh, what an interesting person, right? Let me connect with that person, get to know them a little bit better. Sometimes in just building the connections for your business, you can have a flourishing kind of connection that in 6 months ends up being, somebody who you'd want to do something and partner with. For other people, it might take a little bit longer to do it. So part of it is calculating, what are you really trying to do? And I always think about the metaphor for a brand new business. So for somebody who's launching a brand new business, it's like a 2-year-old where you don't want to be putting all of these expectations, like, why aren't you walking? Why aren't you talking? Why aren't you delivering me the income that it took me 30 years to develop in my corporate career, in my other business? So like it needs time, and it really needs space in order to grow.
Okay, so you've done all of your listening. Now what?
Listening never ends, first of all, but yes, the steps really in the iterative process is to really, be clear as to what it is that you're trying to do. And even in that mission, that can kind of shift and change a little bit over time, but get clear about the kind of folks who are really at the center of your ecosystem. So who's your ideal customer? Who are the people you're wanting to connect with? And then as you begin to learn about different players in this ecosystem surrounding them that also are people with aligned values or companies with aligned values that are also working with those folks, you begin to do a whole series of what I call tiny marketing actions. And so there's an analysis part, there's a like listening, you begin to get some good connections. You're like, wow, every other person has talked about this local organization that's doing great work. Let me do a tiny marketing action of reaching out, telling them I've heard great things, and seeing if they want to jump on Zoom, or seeing, whenever we can meet in person, if they want to go grab a cup of coffee, and to begin to make those connections. In order to be doing this at volume, it really is where you have, I was listening to a podcast, Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast, where he was
Guy
interviewing.
Kawasaki, who is the blurb on the front of your book, by the
Yes,
way.
he is the
Yes.
blurb.
You
Yes, Guy
need
has been
Pam's
very
expertise. That is what Guy Kawasaki says.
That's right. I
Casual.
love him. He's been a great dear friend. But and an example of a relationship many, many, many years in the making. But it was Dave, I think it was Dave Evans from the D School at Stanford, and he was talking about in design thinking, you have 3 main components. You have art, psychology, and engineering. And it just really struck me. I've heard about design thinking for so long, but in this process, actually you need all 3 of those. So you do need some of the art of really understanding, how am I going to visualize what I'm doing? How can I begin to create a model and shape like what I think the ecosystem is surrounding my ideal clients or customers? And then the psychology is, how do I deal with all the weirdness? I call it like being the weirdo in the room, or having those awkward conversations when you're reaching out to somebody who you don't know. And especially where you're like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing yet, but would you like to have a conversation about how it is that we might be supporting these people, and just learning about the psychology of connecting, learning about your own psychology of your habits, of what does it take you to consistently be reaching out and making connections. But the engineering part is a really important component, where then you actually hardwire it into your business operations, because I always see, I think one of the only reasons why we have our financial shit together is because we would be audited by the IRS, or our credit score would be really affected, that could impact our ability to buy things that we want if we don't take care of it. There is no such thing on the marketing side. You could totally ignore all your marketing activities for 6 months, and sometimes you can think everything's great because you're still getting referrals, or just randomly things are working for you, until all of a sudden they aren't, which is
Yeah.
probably a lot of the last couple of years, right? What we've seen.
Yeah, I think you just described my business. I'm feeling very called out here, Pam Slim.
I'm not calling you out personally, but
Oh, yikes. Aaron says, much of what you were talking about is what I used to do with my occupational advisory committees in my role as a career and technical educator.
Mm,
It is an essential part of ensuring that curriculums are kept in line in real time with industry needs rather than having a static curriculum which does
yes.
not evolve as the needs of business evolve. And I think that's so true. I mean, so often we find ourselves responding to what we learned about in the market last year, right? And not
Yes.
evolving and not getting bigger. Now, as you know, I come out of the world of politics and they say if you want money, ask for advice. Right. So if you want to raise money for people, you don't ask them for money, you ask them for their advice and they feel bought in to your success. And then they want to help steward it, right? They want to help fund it. And I think that what you're describing is sort of similar,
Mm,
right? You're asking
mm.
people for their advice because A, you want to get their advice, but B, you're starting to create those long-term relationships, which then each will create more relationships.
It's so true. And Aaron, you are a person after my own heart because this is why I am so thankful for my training in training and development and performance improvement. Because what the question becomes when you can really define the problem you're trying to solve. So like in the case Aaron was talking about of even doing technical education, um, you're literally trying to solve the problem of helping to move people through this transformational journey from where they're starting, like they don't know the technology, to actually knowing it to the extent that they can safely and effectively use it. And that is something that is real and is measurable, and that no amount of marketing or communication fluff can cover up. And that's the part when it comes to me, like the heart of the work that I do in working with small business owners to solve difficult problems. Like, what happens if everything in my entire focus of my business shuts down because of an unexpected pandemic and I have to start from scratch? And,
That'll
how,
never happen.
that would never happen, or how do I manage cash flow if I'm in a business where I'm really selling directly to consumers and I can't force people to be, giving me money when on my timeline. Like a lot of these things, in order to really solve that problem, first of all, there's no way I could ever figure it out totally myself, which is why I think I'm drawn to the ecosystem model because like you, I know, Laura, I have so many smart friends where I can be like, hey, Jonathan Fields, like, how do people actually get sponsors on their podcast? Or, what is the way that I can really think about pricing strategically to big companies? And this is the kind of thing, if you're actually focused on helping people truly to solve the problems that your business is organized to solve, you realize you have to continue listening, like Aaron is saying. You have to have really deep relationships and trust built with the people you're working with so that they don't just come in a flood sometimes, and maybe they're drawn in by interest and enthusiasm that you generate with your marketing. But then once they get into the actual experience, do they feel like this is providing a solution for me that's really helpful? And if not, then you just end up having people trickle away. They're not necessarily going to be referring others. So very maybe cynically, but I like to think realistically. I say it's so much easier just to like make up a model and make it sound really smart and sexy and write a book about it because it sounds easy and cool than it is to work over a period of years with real people in the real struggle and to think about things that are going to actually make a difference. It is hard. And I've been surprised in 25 years of being both a management consultant for 10 years and then being a business coach for 15. There are a whole bunch of people who are super successful financially who don't really actually do a great job at solving the problem that people are paying them money to solve. And sometimes I'm like, really? Like, but it's just part of the way business works.
Queen Bee, who I know because that's what she goes by. She's a newsletter subscriber of mine. So Queen Bee, I'm going to call you that. She says, loving this. Great advice. Sometimes it's tempting to jump in full throttle into your side business without spending enough time on the side business. Were
Mm.
you in that position? And how did you know when it was time to jump in the pool?
I love that question so much. It's the one for 10 years straight when I work with people in corporate that they were asking. So Queen Bee, I will give you what I did and then what I tell everybody else. Because what I did is I was formerly the director of training and development at Barclays Global Investors in San Francisco. And I turned 30. I got pneumonia. We had a merger, and my favorite managers and VP left to go to other companies. And I was like, yeah, I'm ready to move. And I just quit. No plan, no real savings. I didn't have any kids, wasn't married. I'm like, it's 1996 in the San Francisco Bay Area, huge growth cycle. Like, I'll be fine. And as I was out there and looking for different jobs, because I never intended to work for myself, that's when there were some opportunities, but none of them that really sounded interesting. I just didn't really want to be stepping back into that situation. So I ended up going to work as a consultant at Hewlett Packard, where my former manager had moved. She was building the global worldwide management development curriculum. So she had a project that she needed some help on. And so when I moved there, that's when I discovered that, oh my God, I love working for myself. And I had been the volunteer executive director for a capoeira group, a Afro-Brazilian dance group, for 11 years. And so I hadn't realized that I had actually developed a lot of entrepreneurial skills, like you're talking about, in order to do it. So that's what I did, which I tell my clients, do not do that, because I have a huge tolerance for risk, gigantic, sometimes to my detriment. And I love building relationships, and I have a lot of embedded connections. Normally, there are a couple variables that I really look for. One of them is if somebody has really done a financial analysis to make sure that they have some financial runway. And if they're in a partnership, or they have, other people in their lives that are impacted, because everybody goes into business with you when you quit your job to be on your own, that you need to really have hard conversations about a plan, about what is your runway, what is the timeline in which you're willing to experiment, and then what's the day when each of you, or if it's just you yourself, can look at your account and say, I've hit that limit where I need to activate my temporary plan B. I'm never one for doing the Jerry Maguire, if you've ever seen that movie, where he grabs a goldfish and does a big speech and basically burns all bridges when he leaves. I'm like, you can not have a good time, but do not burn all the bridges, because it may be a prudent decision sometimes to go back and do a little consulting for your company, or to have some other ideas for how it is that you're going to manage the uncertain timeline. So that's one of them. And I think the other one is, I am a huge fan of a side hustle. You need to have people besides your dad, your sister, and your best friend who are going to buy stuff from you. And you need to make sure that over a period of time, hopefully 6 to 12 months, that you can begin to see some patterns about your ability to consistently, sell and market. That said, do whatever the hell you want, because people make different decisions, and there's not one checklist. But in my first book, Escape from Cubicle Nation, I do have an entire chapter about the kinds of ducks to put in a row before you maybe make the leap.
Yeah, I did the Jerry Maguire thing, and I will definitely not recommend it. I remember I walked into my boss's office one day having realized that we weren't actually solving our clients' problems, but we actually were their problem. We were charging them a lot of money for not giving them what they needed. And I was like, there's a better way. And he was like, there's the door. It's like, he basically gave me a choice that I could either stay and do things in a way that didn't feel right with me, that didn't resonate with me, that weren't consonant with who I was, or I could leave. And I, was young and brash, and I was like, screw you, motherfucker. I'm out of here. So yeah, I definitely also don't recommend that. But I want to go to, so in your book, you talked about the ecosystem. There's this ecosystem wheel, the Widest Net ecosystem wheel that gives you your ideal customers defined by problem or aspiration. So if you're someone like Queen Bee and you're thinking about, how do I know when it's time? Do you create a map on your 40-foot whiteboard about sort of who all the potential people might be? Because yes, you want to have that side hustle. You want to have it for a while. You want to figure out it's not just your dad and your sister and your friends that are buying your product or whatever you're doing. But I think a lot of what you talk about in the book is that there are so many untapped markets, or so many customers you don't even realize are out there. How does someone like Queen Bee figure out who the potential customers are? Because you can look at the numbers, but if you're not looking at the full potential, you're not really looking at the real numbers.
It's really true. So yeah, the ecosystem wheel came from trying to just create a way to have different segments of the ecosystem that are places or slices where you can be looking for other people, organizations, media hubs, in person and online, that are also providing resources, advice, support, services, products to the kind of people who you want to reach. And my argument is, if you find somebody, so I'll use an example. I have my friends at GoDaddy, which is a company that is headquartered here locally in Phoenix. And in our ecosystem here, kind of in our small business startup community, there are companies that serve the small business market that we can cross each other's paths. So I can know people, who work there. If I look at GoDaddy's customers, I think they have 18 million customers that are using their whole variety of different services. So where I have something that new coming out, a book, or I had a class, Tiny Marketing Actions class last year, I want to be strategic, saying if I can be connecting with them and providing value to their customers, they have a desire to be providing useful information to their customers about building a business. Why don't I go to what I call a watering hole? So in this case, I reached out to them about doing a webinar that they would be bringing their customers to, so that I could be bringing my expertise in a topic that would be helpful to help their customers grow a business, because they're providing their products and services, but they know that there's other things that their customers need in order to fully realize their goal of having a healthy business. So that was an example where we reached out. I did a couple webinars, which were so fun and amazing. They had brought thousands of their customers that were there. And then I was able to connect with people that I never would have known or connected with without having that kind of partnership. And so part of what it is that you're doing, and I'll just keep calling you Queen Bee, Queen, is that when you're looking at the ecosystem, so these examples are like other service providers. To me, this is a natural thing. If you happen to have a business where you're a coach, consultant, lawyer, accountant, and you're working with your ideal clients, they always are working with other amazing service providers. My clients, all day, every day, I'm referring them to intellectual property attorneys, small marketing agencies, branding agencies, photographers. Like literally, if you were to look at my email and my social stream, just yesterday I probably referred 8 people, which are other service providers, to my audience. So a good place to start, even if you're just looking at that one segment of the ecosystem wheel, is, are there other people who are already reaching customers that you love just like you, and begin to kind of build those connections. So it's the process, and it'll make more sense when you get the book and can really see the entire model. But the reason I say it's iterative is you look out and you say, for the market that I'm in and for where my customers are, which of these segments really make the most sense for me to begin to dig in and do some work? I'm going to begin to gather some data, ask my ideal customers, like, where do you hang out? What's your favorite conference? What thought leaders do you follow? And then through tiny marketing actions, every day doing these little bits of outreach to begin to make connections. And again, I just want to make that process visible. The way I met Guy Kawasaki, I've told this story many times, but it was 2006, and I had written a blog post on Escape from Cubicle Nation, my blog at the time. And I had probably 50 readers at the time, but I wrote an open letter to CEOs across the corporate world. I had been following Guy's work. I thought he was amazing, super interesting. And so I just sent an email and I said, I just wrote this post. I thought you might enjoy it. And 10 minutes later, he emailed me back and he said, can you make it a top 10 list? Because he loves top 10 lists. I, furiously wrote the rest of the points, sent it back to him. He posted it on his blog the next day. And that's where my entire world just totally changed. I mean, it's that, and it really, in all these years, was the one moment that I had such a massive virility. But it's where I met Bob Sutton from Stanford and Seth Godin and Nancy Duarte and all these other people, because it exemplifies he was sitting on a watering hole of people who shared values, had similar interests, and was talking about a topic that I could provide a unique perspective to. And so, of course, those viral moments don't happen all the time, but where you look every day, are you trying to slowly reach out and build connections with people? That's where, especially for the referral network, things start to take off.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story. People ask me all the time how I ended up on Good Morning America, and I say, well, I was speaking at an event where Robin Roberts was one of the speakers, and I didn't get a chance to meet her because I was signing books while she was on stage, and then I had to leave for the airport before she got off stage. But I had been speaking at a series of events, and the MC, I was like the 4th speaker of 5, warming up for Malala, warming up for Robin Roberts, like ridiculous, crazy. But I still was sort of struggling to get people to know me. I was like one of like a bunch of like the undercard card speakers. And the events were always running long. And so before I go on, I'd look at the MC and I'm like, all right, you got me on for 45 minutes, but it looks like you're running 7 minutes over. Should I just do 38? And he was like, what, really? You do that? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, you're the star. I'm not the star. And so I'd go out there and I made his life easy. And then he pulled Robin Roberts aside and was like, here, you have to read this book. You're going to love this. And she read it on the plane home from Vancouver to New York and handed it to her senior producer and said, get her on the show. Because I think it's like, we think that we have to be doing these huge, big things that are all like, me. Tell me, let me tell you about me.
Yes.
When really what we need to be doing is providing service for other people and making their lives easier, because they have these networks of people and they have influence that we don't even realize they have. I had no idea who was going to hand my book to Robin Roberts. In fact, not only did he hand my book to her, he chased her out to the car, leaned into her window, handed her the book, and he'd already told me, he said, sign a little dedication to it,
Yeah.
and make it really good. So I did. And then I guess he like chased her out the car and said, you need to read this. And apparently she opened the book, read the dedication and went, wow. And then read it. Like, he went out of his way to help me. But that was not, quote unquote marketing, right? So these tiny marketing actions are not always marketing.
It's relationship building.
Yeah.
And it's around having this clarity of what your passion is. To me, it's like we tend to think sometimes in business, like everything is just centered on you and we want to attract attention and get all the fancy, famous or, media hubs to notice us. To me, really the essence of actually what keeps you going in the good and bad times is your commitment to the mission and really what the work is.
Yes.
The reason I think why you were, so attracted to Robin, who I love, who's so amazing, why every chance I get, I talk about John Legend. I talked about in my TEDx talk.
I know you love you some John Legend.
Sooner or later, John's going to hear from somebody to somebody, right? That I would love to connect. Not because I love his music, of course, but I'm so fascinated and I can see that there's a shared mission. A lot of the different choices he makes, I'm so interested in solving some of the similar kinds of problems. And so it's having that clarity and passion of the mission, and then in really being clear and speaking up and sharing, with your network, like, this is what I'm trying to do. Here are the kinds of companies that would be dreams for me to partner with, or I would love eventually to get the chance to work with XYZ person. That's sometimes the reason why, folks get a chance to be connecting with people. And then other times, you can do things like hire a PR agent and, do things to get on media. But to me, it's the thing that really keeps me energized over time is that it is about a shared passion for solving the problems of your ideal customers. And like, I can talk all day long with anybody, be it somebody from a SaaS company that serves a small business market to somebody who's an influencer, about how do we solve this cash flow problem? Like, everybody still, all of these decades later, is struggling with cash flow. How can we be thinking about this differently?
Yeah. And I love it because I know your book starts, like, step one, find the mission, right? Like, find the mission at your root is like the first chapter of the book. So, that's where I start with. I start with, like, what do you actually care about? What is actually the thing that makes you excited, and not this external version of what success should be. I mean, I had somebody call me up and they were like, this is the first business self-help book I ever read that didn't tell me to, like, go buy a Maserati and a beach house and I'd be happy. Right? I was like, yes, because I don't care if you want to buy it. Like, doesn't matter. Like, what makes you happy? So let's talk about the role of competitors in this ecosystem. Before we got on, I was telling you how I'm having this, problem with the speech I'm supposed to give on Sunday night, because on Saturday we're going to get 2 feet of snow and I'm trying to figure out how to get there. And I'm trying to find somebody who could be, like, quote unquote on deck, like, just in case I can't fly out. A lot of people would say, well, that's just crazy. Why would you do that? Why are you handing work to somebody else? Then your client will get to know them. But I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, I believe that success is not like pie, right? There's, more than enough. We can all have some. And I think all the boats rise together. You mentioned Scott Stratton earlier, and he talks about taking elevators to the top. I think that there's a role for all of it. So what's the role of a competitor in this ecosystem?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the lens that I think about in defining an ecosystem. So as we said, I serve small business owners. I love it. I just love that market. So entrepreneurs, small business owners, in the totality of everybody who is talking about, writing about, selling products to helping entrepreneurs, There are some people who I am super aligned with in values, and there are other people who I am really not aligned with. And, especially to like buy a Maserati and showcase how much money you have with
Right.
$100 bills. So that's an example where it, when I'm really identifying an ecosystem that I want to be connecting with for relationships in the business, there is a shared value. In shared value, sometimes you and I, like, we could run across probably similar clients, right? For
Mhm.
some of the stuff we do that could conceptually be talking to either one of us. But because I know you and I trust you, I care about you and your family, I've seen your work, I believe in it, and I know that you are a person of ethics. So you would know, and some of this can be really explicit. In the case where you have somebody who may be stepping in and speaking for you if you can't make it, they're going to know, because of the shared values,
Right.
the parameters about how they're going to be managing that situation. If it were me, I absolutely reinforcing your strengths, making sure that they know if there's anybody interested in the talk that I would be referring you as well. I would ask you, okay, how do you want me to cue this up?
Yep.
How should I, right, do this with my audience? So to me, we I call it peanut butter and jelly partners. Sometimes you have highly complementary skills that are not overlapping, but I have plenty of people in my market that are actually selling directly a similar service to the same customer. By values, those I don't define. We are competitors in just a healthy competitive market, but I probably wouldn't refer somebody, I mean, I never would, whose fundamental values and ethics are not aligned with mine. Because whenever we do that, whoever we refer is going to be reflective of our own values. And somebody be like, well, that was so weird. Pam
Yes.
referred that person, but like, man, like, what was she thinking? And so
Right. Or did
that's
she
why
know
there's,
that he was gonna screw her and,
yeah,
try to, right?
exactly.
Like that kind of thing, and you're like,
Yeah.
ugh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny when I ran my executive search firm, I used to say to my team that, like, we don't sell talent. We don't sell finding the best candidates.
Yeah.
We don't sell the deepest research. We don't sell the most insightful interviews. We sell trust. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, we just sell trust. Our
Yeah.
clients have to understand that we see their problem and we understand their problem. And oh, their problem's so unique, but their problem's unique to them. It wasn't unique to us. We'd seen it, we'd solved it, we understand it. All that was left was for our clients to understand that we see and get it and hold their problem in our hands as our shared problem until such time that that shared problem disappears.
Yeah.
And that, I think, really comes down, like, you cannot sell trust if you are not connected to your mission, if you don't
Mhm.
understand why you're doing the work.
Yeah. And can we talk about dark underbelly hard stuff around this for a
Yes,
second? Because
please.
I know
Yes,
you love to
yes.
talk about that like I
I
do.
love the dark
Um,
underbelly.
man, partnerships,
Oof.
friendships that are mixed with workships, um, going into doing, joint ventures with people, working with people that have different working styles, having maybe, friends and clients that might be connected with certain people who you are not really vibing with, but are
Yep.
really important to them,
Yep.
can be very hard, and it can break your goddamn heart. I
Oh,
quoted, I quoted
been
my,
there,
my,
felt that.
right? I quoted Moonstruck, which is my favorite movie of all time,
Yes, yes,
with
share.
but Nicolas Cage's advice when he's trying to, invite her into his room for the second time, of just like, you think love is this fairy tale, it's a heartbreak, it's terrible, it's awful. Like, I quoted that in the book because sometimes it is, when you're
Yeah.
putting your full heart out there. You can embarrass yourself. You can have, somebody break your heart. You cannot show up as the partner that you want, and you can absolutely break somebody else's heart. And so this is not for the faint of heart. There's certain days where I'm like, man, I wish I was just a transactional business person and I could just not care about anybody and just look at people as numbers. I mean, I wouldn't be myself, but it
Yeah.
it actually is more challenging emotionally, which is, why I feel doing your own work, having emotional intelligence, learning about how to take feedback, doing lots and lots of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion is super important in order to understand. Because when you're talking about reaching, a really wide net, you're talking about connecting with all kinds of different people. So it's not only for folks in, like, my own identity as a white woman or a white man, but it can be intersectional connection, for everybody who's doing that work. We have to learn more about each other so that we approach it from a spirit of curiosity and growth mindset. Otherwise, we're just going to have our feelings hurt all over the place and be like, fuck this. I do not want to build community anymore. This is too hard.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens? I mean, it's I feel that story very deeply. What happens when you go into business with somebody and over time what matters to them changes?
It totally happens. I wrote a whole book about it for body of work, right?
Right.
You can go through different stages in your life. Certain life events can happen that can definitely have an impact. Boy, I can tell you the last couple of years, I was shocked to see sometimes like really specific shifts in people politically, values wise,
Oh,
like,
it's
and
been
just,
such a disappointing couple of
woo,
years. Oh
yeah, I
God.
mean,
I
just
mean, the people who I knew stood for the stuff that I believed in really stood for it, and that was fine. But man, so I wasn't there weren't a lot of pleasant surprises. There were a
it,
lot of unpleasant reveals, right?
it's
Oof.
hard, and we're influenced in just so many different ways in terms of how it is that we navigate the world, and each person is on their own journey. Like, I just
Yeah.
know that and believe that, and try not to interfere. It's more, as I said, and when I'm just looking at what is my role and responsibility of contributing to the field that I'm working in and to my clients, I'm just going to keep navigating, right, to make shifts. But in the case where you have had a long-term relationship and you do see some of those, value shifts, it's why you have to have ongoing communication and sometimes
Mhm.
have the tough breakup conversation. Seems like we're moving some different directions. I think it's having an impact, on the partnership. What are your goals, kind of where you're going, and sometimes where you have to have, the hard but helpful conversation. It is very, very hard to
Yes.
be in partnership if you're coming from a different values perspective. I have tried to work around it, like, because I can truly love and appreciate and have a history with somebody. But if the daily values that are showing up as behaviors and awareness are not there, it's going to be very destructive for my business.
So can we talk about Lavista for a minute?
Yes.
Lavista Jones, who is absolutely
Yes.
incredible and partners with you at the Learning Lab. Talk
Yes.
about how you found her, how you knew she was the one. I mean, she's absolutely phenomenal. And I think that partnership is a really great example of one
Mhm,
where two people who sort of come from different places but
mhm.
found that shared mission really are able to do great things.
I love that. I love Lavista so much. So in the really the model of how our learning lab works now. So after just listening for a super long time and then noticing what people wanted, really what we found is folks wanted a space in order to show up and really be experimenting, launching new programs, hosting events. But in our case, with our focus, it's really all hosted and led by our Black, Indigenous, folks of color entrepreneurs. And so Lavista came to an event by my longtime dear friend Aisha Cogborn, who was running Startup Life Support. And she demonstrated what we call the seeding effect here, or the sprouting effect, which is somebody would come to an event and they're like, wow, look at that whiteboard. Place is kind of cool. Like, I've been thinking about this idea. And for Lavista, it was boss talk. She wanted to do a
Yep.
special kind of conversation with other business owners. And so she was like, hey, could I do something here? And our answer is usually always yes. Like, yes, when should we do it? Let's look at the calendar. And so she started to run her own events here. And because she was also working with Aisha, we just began to have a lot of conversations. And the more that we would have conversations, she is my perfect peanut butter and jelly. I love her so deeply much for so many reasons. But when I look at the compliment that she brings, she is my engineering operational person. She's literally an operations consultant, and she focuses on self care and really making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, which in my enthusiasm to do all the things all the time, I need both of those. So it just was a matter of us beginning to work together. And then I brought her in to do the work like we did with you in an all day intensive where she's there taking notes, kind of providing that structure. And it's just an example of, for us, really, like 5 years in development that we've gotten to know each other. And that's one of the huge benefits to me of having folks use the space is all the conversations. I mean, of course, we had a time shut down and are still really slowly getting back together, but it's just the conversations we have at the tea machine in the kitchen or people bopping by the office and sitting in the red chair and having a conversation.
Yeah,
That's my fave.
what I thought was so impressive about the way that you two work together, which of course, I witnessed firsthand when I hired you to help me launch my course from my book, was she provided so I sent my kids to Montessori school when they were
Me
little, and
too. Me
people, yeah,
too.
and so Montessori people are like, oh, Montessori, those kids are just like they can do whatever the hell they want all day long. And it's like, no, actually they can't. They have unlimited freedom within very specific boundaries. And I feel like Lavista gave you unfettered freedom within very specific boundaries. She was like, okay, now we're going to talk about this thing for this hour. Pam, go. And she allowed you to be incredibly creative while
Hmm.
keeping us on track the whole time, and
Yeah,
sort of seeing when you were like going outside of where we were and pulling you back and just allowing us to kind of jam on these ideas.
that's right.
But it's not just so much like she wasn't just like a timekeeper, right? Like she was
Yeah.
actually seeing, and she was taking notes to like, we're going to bring that back at the 3 o'clock hour, and we're going to do these things. And
Mhm,
it really allowed you to be so present in the moment
mhm.
in your own area of brilliance. And I think that partnership, Queen Bee said, she said her son a Montessori school too.
Yeah.
You see, this is like a Montessori love
Montessori
fest here.
families, I'm such a fan,
Absolutely.
such a fan. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I just that ability to find your peanut butter and jelly, I think a lot of people find somebody who is like them because they're
Mhm.
like, I recognize you, right? Like, I'll know a good partner when I see it. Well, if you know a good partner when you see it, it's because you've seen it before, which means you probably look at in the mirror every single day, right? Like, so when entrepreneurs are like, they're listening, they're figuring out their ideas, they're thinking about their potential ecosystem, how do they understand that they need a partner,
Mm.
right? Like, because I think a lot of mistakes people make sometimes also is they partner with someone that they could employ,
Yeah,
right? So how
yeah.
do you figure out how you need, like, when you need a partner, and then how do you identify who that partner should be?
Yeah, the need is, I mean, it's a little bit different depending on what somebody's business is, but the more that I go through time, especially anybody who really wants to scale their business to any, reasonable level, it's just impossible to do it yourself. You can't do everything yourself. And so when you begin to really look at understanding yourself and the strengths that you bring, and then as you said, I have no problem with the art, the art of going off on ideas and models and conceptualization, but I need somebody to land the plane. I need to have people who are bringing that structure. Actually, all throughout my career, I've worked with amazing people like that. My friend Darren Padilla, who was my colleague in my management consulting days for 5 years, brings that same kind of beautiful lens that Lavista brings now. And he and I are actually working together again in doing some of the like licensing and certification programs. And so to me, it's knowing myself and especially noticing. My friend Greg Hartle mentioned this, which I put in the book. Notice what bothers you. So you can begin to notice that you're going through your jam, you're doing your day, and you're like, God, I hate, for me, it's often, I love to speak. I adore speaking. I hate to do the dang, what's the title of the talk and what's the pithy description? Like, I'm just like, that feels so hard. And then my friend and client, Tamsin Webster, is like, here's a formula. Like, here's a way that you can begin to write that because it's always something that bothers me. Or in the case I found where Livista and I first connected, I love to do strategic sessions. I hate to then have to type up the notes after, or if somebody's just trying to type up my wild, drawing afterward, they don't understand it. So that's when I got the idea that let's have a co-pilot of somebody right there along with us to do the work. So the client at the, right at the end of the day gets the email with the notes in it.
Yes.
And, those are the kind of things. And in terms of finding the right partners, you just have to test and try. Say, start really slow, start with teeny tiny projects. She and I started with one intensive, and now we've probably done 60 together over the years, and then do a bunch of other work together now as well.
I love it. I love it. So I know I asked you questions about your new book, The Widest Net, but I know I also talked about body of work and Escape from Cubicle Nation because
Mm,
it's all part of your body of work, right? So all of these, I believe, the body of that Escape from Cubicle Nation, body of work, and now the Widest Net are essential tools
mhm.
for entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to make the most of their great ideas. So if people want to find you, Pam, how do they get in touch with you? How do they find your books? How do they find your work?
PamelaSlim.com is the place you can find all my stuff, my social connections. I love the folks I've seen already. Aaron, I know he had to run, but I'll connect with him on LinkedIn after, and certainly for you, Queen. Um, if you want to get, I have a PDF of all the exercises in the Widest Net. I am a coach, so I always give exercises. So you can go to PamelaSlim.com/the Widest Net. And I have all kinds of resources there. I also list the links for all the amazing people who I feature in the book, because there are some amazing stories and people you should also be reaching out to connect with.
Oh, I love that. What a way to demonstrate your message.
You know, you gotta live it to give it, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Pam, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.